She immigrated to the United States at the age of 12 with her family, and later, inspired by the X-Men, developed superhero therapy to help patients with anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Her book, Superhero Therapy, has been called a dynamic, illustrated introduction to acceptance and commitment therapy, using relatable examples drawn from the world of comics, sci-fi, and fantasy. Joining Dr. Scarlett on stage tonight is moderator Dustin McGinnis. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Thanks so much, Samantha. You guys, can we get a round of applause for the Barnes & Noble staff? So again, thank you all for coming out tonight. I know it's been raining, and but my name is Dustin McGinnis. I'm a musician, a filmmaker, and an all-around fanboy. And we came here tonight to talk about superhero therapy. And Janina, what is superhero therapy?
Superhero therapy refers to incorporating popular culture like comic books as well as characters from fantasy, science fiction, and video games into evidence-based, which means research-supported therapy to treat a number of different mental health disorders such as anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and others.
So how does someone come to this conclusion and develop a therapy like this?
There are actually a number of therapists in the United States that are working on this approach. For me, my story dates back to Ukraine. I was born and raised in Ukraine, and when I was just a few months shy of my 3rd birthday, my family and I were exposed to Chernobyl radiation. And it affected me in a number of different ways. I was sick a lot as a child. My immune system was destroyed, and the way that the radiation exposure affected me the most is whenever the weather would change, when it's raining, especially like it is today. I get pretty severe migraines and sometimes seizures. So in case any of you were wondering why I'm wearing these fancy glasses, these are actually migraine helping glasses. They help filter the light. So for me, for the longest time, I really struggled with feeling weak and broken. And I remember as a kid being in the hospital and reading books and wanting to have superpowers, wanting to have magical abilities like a lot of the characters I was reading about. So I was about 15 when, I was 12 when my family and I immigrated to the United States, and I was 15 when I first really entered the geek world and was crazy. You guys remember the first X-Men movie in 2000? For those of you that have seen several X-Men movies, that one was not great. In fact, it was my first one, and I fell in love because I saw myself on the screen. So for those of you who don't know the X-Men are Marvel superheroes, all of whom have some kind of a genetic mutation. They have some kind of a difference, maybe a superpower or a skill that they developed as a result of a genetic mutation, genetic change. And many of them developed it because they were exposed to radiation. And a lot of them have been persecuted and bullied for being different. And I could relate to all of that because as a child I was also bullied. When my family and I first came to the States, I was 12. I was in 7th grade. Do you guys remember 7th grade? 7th grade survivors here? Yeah, me too. So I was actually heavily bullied. I didn't speak English. I didn't have a lot of variety in clothes. So I wore a lot of similar clothes, and I was the girl from the radioactive country, so some people would tease me and ask me if I glow in the dark or if I'm radioactive. I remember during parent-teacher conferences, my teacher would tell my mom, Janina is such a good student, she gets really good grades, why is she always so sad? And the truth is, I was picked on, I was bullied, I had no friends, and on most days I just wanted to die. When I saw the first X-Men movie, I felt as if I developed a new set of friends. Now, these friends were fictional, but I felt like I could relate to them. I felt like they could speak to me. And luckily enough, in high school, I was able to meet other friends and other people that I could relate to in a geeky and nerdy way. And through that, developed if the X-Men helped me in this way, maybe be able to help other people. So I went on to study psychology, and later, during my postdoctoral training, I was working with active duty service members, specifically Marines, with PTSD. And I kept hearing this expression over and over and over again. They would tell me, I wanted to be Superman, I failed. Now, doesn't that just break your heart? Right? These incredible men and women who've seen some of the most atrocious, horrible things in their lives, believing themselves to be a failure because they've developed a mental health disorder. So this is where my geeky knowledge came in, and I would ask them, well, does Superman have any kind of vulnerability? You guys know?
Yes.
Kryptonite, that's right. So Superman is vulnerable to kryptonite. Kryptonite is this green substance from his home planet, and he's basically allergic to it. It makes him, it weakens his powers, and in large enough quantities it can kill him. So I would ask the Marines that I was working with, does this make him any less of a superhero? What do you think? No, of course not. We're all vulnerable to something. Every single superhero out there has an origin story that begins in trauma. And that's exactly what our experiences are, origin stories. And so in restructuring trauma and anxiety and depression and our painful experiences in this way, it gives us a jumping off point, right? If my trauma is my origin story, then I get to decide the heroic journey that I then take on afterwards. So that's where superhero therapy came from. It came from some of these experiences that I had, as well as noticing how important it is to other people to have this sense of identity, of this sense of heroic identity with whether it's fictional characters or maybe people in real life, that would allow them to understand that they can become superheroes in real life.
And superheroes are, really huge nowadays. I mean, can I get a raise of hands? How many people went to Comic-Con this weekend? Everybody here. So we can all relate. We can all make connections to these characters. And your book, it's the first self-help book I've ever seen of this kind. It has a new structure. It has comic book elements to it. Can you give us a little bit more about the structure of?
Sure. I really like, it was actually my publisher's idea to do the book structured in this way. So part of it is self-help and part of it is comic book. So it has a comic book side by side with the self-help elements. And actually, my publisher and I were extremely fortunate to be able to get Wellington Alves to illustrate it. For those of you who don't know him, Wellington Alves is a well-known Marvel artist. He works for Marvel Comics and illustrates a lot of well-known Marvel comics. And he took a huge pay cut to do this project. But he was so passionate about it, he believed in it. So the story, the book itself is part fiction, part nonfiction. So for you, the reader, there's the nonfiction part that tells you how to utilize certain skills, and then you're also reading about fictional characters. So there are 6 superheroes, all of whom have some kind of a mental health disorder, such as depression or anxiety or an eating disorder. And you see them going to a superhero training academy where they learn how to better manage some of these skills. And as a result, how to continue their superhero journey, how to not be held back by some of the things that they're struggling with.
One of the elements in your book is something that a lot of people aren't familiar with. I wasn't familiar with it when I first read it, and that's the idea of self-compassion. Can you go into that a little bit?
Sure. How many of you are familiar with self-compassion? About half of you. And that's actually good because that means the idea of self-compassion is spreading. It's still fairly new. Now, most of us know what compassion is, right? Being empathic, being supportive of other people who are suffering. But most of us don't really practice self-compassion or might have a hard time with it. So how many of you find it easier to be compassionate and nice and kind to other people than you do to yourself? It's a universal phenomenon, right? Most of us, when somebody else makes a mistake or somebody else is sick, we're the first person there, right? We'll say, oh, honey, it's okay, let me help you, how can I support you? We go out of our way to support our loved ones, our friends, our coworkers, sometimes even people we don't like. But when we're struggling, then we call ourselves weak, we call ourselves really bad names, right? We become pretty abusive, in fact, sometimes. In fact, I think if we treated our significant others the way we treat ourselves when we're struggling, they wouldn't be very happy with us. That would be considered abuse. And The idea behind self-compassion is that we can learn to practice being as kind to ourselves as we are toward other people. You know, there's an expression, treat others the way you want to be treated, but I actually think it should be treat yourself the way you treat your loved ones. Because it's really, really hard to do that. So the idea of self-compassion stems from being able to nurture ourselves to wellness so that we have the strength and resilience to be able to do what's necessary. If you've ever flown on a plane, you know they tell you put on your own mask before assisting other people, right? They do that because if you pass out, you're not going to be very helpful to your child. So we need to be able to take care of ourselves in order to help other people. There's no one way to practice self-compassion. So self-compassion could be as little as maybe taking a nap or eating something. It could be bigger. For example, maybe taking a day off and resting, coming to a book signing, for example, watching a movie. All of these can be examples of self-compassion. The main thing about self-compassion is that it's an intention. I'm going to do something kind for myself because this is hard right now, because I'm struggling, and because I need this to get the strength and energy to then be able to do what's necessary.
I can definitely relate with that because I find that I'm really down on myself a lot. And what I'm thinking about right now is, why is it so hard to give yourself? Why is it so difficult?
I think that most of us are trained that we need to put everybody else's needs before ourselves, and that if we take care of ourselves, that it's selfish, right? How many of you grew up believing that if we take care of ourselves, it's selfish? And in fact, forgive me for stereotyping for a moment, but men and women are stereotypically given the same messages but packaged in different ways. So women are told you have to take care of everybody else and then you can take care of yourself, right? You have to make sure everyone is fed and taken care of, and then if there's time, then you can rest for a little bit. Men are taught that if you feel something, that's not okay. And in fact, even worse, in certain situations, men are taught that if you show your feelings, then you're like a woman, and if you're like a woman, that's a bad thing, right? So stereotypically, men are taught that if you cry, if you show your emotions, if you allow yourself to feel sad, then that makes you weak. That means you're not a good enough man. But in a sense, those are the same things packaged in the same way. In a sense, men and women are both taught that it is not okay to feel our emotions, it is not okay to take care of ourselves, and it is considered weakness. Now, in reality, what we're learning through all the research, that actually if we're able to take care of ourselves, we're calmer, we're stronger, we're more psychologically and physiologically resilient, as opposed to when things keep piling on and piling on and piling on, because after a while we become irritable, we become exhausted, our health might suffer, we might be more susceptible to certain illnesses, including cancer. So we're finding that there are all kinds of psychological and physiological benefits from self-compassion. And one small act of self-compassion we can all do anytime, even during a difficult situation, is put our hand on our heart as almost like a little hug. If any of you want to try it now. It's almost like a little hug, and like a little hug on our heart. So this action right here is set to release oxytocin. Oxytocin is like a little magical potion. It's a hormone that our bodies release when we hug somebody. So if you've ever cuddled a baby or seen a really cute puppy or a kitten, that's when we feel like, ah, right? We have that really sweet feeling, and that's our bodies releasing oxytocin. When we give ourselves this kind of support, when we're struggling, let's say if somebody's yelling at you or you're having a really tough day, taking this short action, just a little hug for ourselves, a little breath, even in the middle of a painful situation, can already give you a little bit of support. And then of course, if you're able to do more, like step away, cry, call a friend, cuddle your dog or cat, that's even better.
We watched a show today called Too Cute. That has all the oxytocin.
It's about kittens. So for any of you cat lovers, it's on Animal Planet, check it out.
So how many of you here bought the book at the store? How many of you here bought the book to get Harry Potter therapy? A few of you? So I think we're going to transition into Harry Potter therapy a little bit here. Can you tell us a little bit about this book and how it came about?
Sure. I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, proud Slytherin, by the way. That's my house. So Harry Potter is a fandom that I really strongly identify with, and the reason why is because I think, in my personal, very biased opinion, Harry Potter portrays mental health unlike any other fandom that I've seen before. It really accurately portrays depression. It portrays phobias and different types of anxiety, including social anxiety, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder in a really accurate, very neat way. J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series, actually did a lot of research on mental health disorders and is herself a survivor of major depressive disorder. She frequently struggles with it and reports that while she was writing Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, the third book, she was struggling with severe depression at that time and actually used it as her inspiration for the Dementors. So for those of you that have not read the books, the Dementors are these dark creatures that, when they're near you, it feels like the world is cold and it feels like things will never ever be okay again. Everything feels empty and you feel like you will never feel happy again. And for any of you who've ever felt depressed, that is what depression feels like. At least that's an element of it. And the readers really strongly identified with this depiction. So when I read the books, I really connected to the way she portrayed different characters' psychological struggles. So I wanted to put out a book that would use Harry Potter language and Harry Potter examples from the books and the movies to teach us how to be able to overcome our own mental health disorders. I've actually, in working with my clients, both teenagers and young adults, and then also in surveying multiple people from the internet, have learned just about how many people have been able to survive as a result of Harry Potter series. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people are reporting that they might have been near death, they might have been at a point where they thought about taking their own life, and reading Harry Potter had given them something to connect to, and they were able to not do that. In fact, in the book, one of the stories that I talk about is that of a woman who, when she was little, had been passed from orphanage to orphanage, and some of the foster families, from foster care to foster care, and some of the foster families she'd been with had been really supportive and wonderful, like the Weasley family, and some of them had been abusive, like the Dursleys. And she reports that when she was 15, she had been so abused and so overwhelmed that she wanted to take her life. She had a razor to her arm, ready to take her life. But she had asked herself one question: what would Harry do? And asking herself that one question actually gave her the strength that she needed at that moment to put the razor down. This woman is now heavily involved in Harry Potter universe. She's connected to Harry Potter fans. She writes fan fiction. She goes to Harry Potter conferences. And it is because of this connection that she was able to overcome the abuse that she was experiencing.
Harry Potter, it hits everybody of all, ages and everything. What is it about Harry Potter that you think connects with people so passionately?
I think the main thing is that there's something for everyone to relate to. Most people I talk to have a different character that they relate to. My personal character that I love and relate to is Snape, but I also love Hermione, and they're all different. I think that in the series there's something different for everybody. There are characters for kids to relate to, there are characters for adults to relate to, there are characters who are strange and awkward and weird, and then there are characters who are bullied, and then there are characters who really value intellect. There are characters who value all kinds of different things and had experienced all kinds of different experiences as well. And I think that because the series are so diverse, there's something for pretty much every reader.
And there's no doubt that Harry Potter himself has gone through so much trauma in the books. Is there a way you can describe maybe how he might fit the criteria for something as strong as PTSD or something like that?
Yeah, so a little spoiler if anyone hasn't read the books. One of Harry's classmates, Cedric Diggory, is killed in one of the books, and Harry witnesses this I'm sorry, I know it was terrible. And Harry witnesses this terrible, terrible murder. So in fact, The person that killed Cedric is the same person that killed Harry's parents. So for Harry, this was extremely traumatizing. This is the same evil monster, evil sorcerer who killed his own parents that now killed his classmate. So in the next book, we actually see Harry having nightmares about seeing his friend being murdered. We see Harry struggling with flashbacks. He's remembering that moment. He's wondering where he could have maybe saved Cedric. He's angry. He's also really hypervigilant. He's jumpy. He's expecting to be in danger at any moment. He's avoiding talking about what happened to him. And he struggles with this for several months. So he actually meets the full criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. And what ultimately helps him recover down the line is what's called post-traumatic growth. How many of you have heard of post-traumatic growth before? So post-traumatic stress disorder is something we all hear about, right? It's in the news. And in fact, post-traumatic growth is a lot more common. Post-traumatic growth refers to finding meaning in a tragedy, in a trauma. So sometimes when somebody close to us dies, or sometimes if we're in a car accident or another near-death experience, we might realize, life is short. And I want to live it in the most meaningful, wonderful way. And it might remind us what we want to do before we die. It might allow us to reconnect with our friends and family, maybe cut down on some of the less meaningful projects and connect with things that are really important. So for Harry, this meant connecting with his friends and following his core value, which meant helping other people, protecting the world from Lord Voldemort, from that evil wizard who killed his parents. And in this connection came a lot of courage, came a lot of struggle, but also came recovery.
So we want to open it up to any questions that you guys might have before we get to the signing. Are there any questions that anybody might have out in the audience? Just want to give you a quick opportunity.
Hi. So I'm Andy Before, and I love your work. And what would you say to someone who's stuck in a toxic relationship with the person they love, and it's a family member, so it's not just an abusive partner. They love that person, but other times they just are so tired.
Thank you for asking that. The question was, what would you say to somebody who's stuck in a toxic, painful relationship with somebody who's maybe a family member? And there's no short answer to this. Of course, this would probably take a pretty significant time of therapy to determine whether this relationship is necessary. How would you want to maybe have a relationship with this individual? So for example, for someone that has a toxic relationship with their sibling or their parent, then the question might be, do you want to have this relationship at all, yes or no, right? And most people probably say they want to continue having this person in their life. Then we might need to talk about boundaries, right? Sometimes if people are so abusive, for example, sometimes people maybe due to substance abuse or other trauma in their life become so burdensome that we might need to set clear limits, such as, I'm going to choose to have you in my life, but I'm going to choose to talk to you for 10 minutes a day. And before and after that, I need to practice self-compassion, right? If let's say you know that there is an individual that is really painful for you to talk to, but you choose to have them in your life, it might mean that you might need to do breathing exercises or meditation or have a support from a therapist or a friend as this is happening. And maybe after the conversation, maybe there needs to be some kind of a relaxing or some kind of a mindful activity to allow you to decompress from this painful conversation. And I think boundaries will be most important in terms of saying, hey, I have 10 minutes, so we're going to talk for these 10 minutes, and during this time I will be open and available to you. I find that a lot of times when we are trying to have relationships with people who are maybe extremely burdening or toxic, we might believe that we have to go above and beyond to fix all their problems, to do everything that they're insisting that we do for them. However, when that happens, we're pulled in many different directions. We might burn out, we might become unhealthy ourselves, and we might be less available to other people that might also need us, right? So in order to be able to provide our solutions, we need to set limits and set boundaries. So again, if that person chooses to remain in contact with someone who is toxic for them, then we would need to discuss healthy and safe boundaries, as well as self-care around it. Thank you for asking that.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I think the current books are pretty much gone for teens and young adults. Do you have anyone who did something younger children?
So there's a book that I have coming out in February. It's called Therapy Quest, and that one would be good for, I think maybe for like 7 and 8 and above. Teens can also read it and adults can read it. The way it's written is kind of like choose your own adventure D&D type of feel. There's no dice or anything. But it's a fantasy book that as you're going through it, you are able to make multiple choices about your mental health, whether you choose to, let's say, practice mindfulness or self-compassion or not. And then depending on your decision, the quest will continue in one way or another way. And so that book will be appropriate for some younger readers as well. Although I'm not planning at this time to have a book for younger readers than 8, I am planning to release some worksheets for therapists and parents to use with younger audiences as well.
Do you find that the wound is all from, that the wound is almost where the goal is as well, like with your superhero, that it's really important to connect with the wound and that's where the strength?
Yes, thank you. The question was, is the wound where the goal of the therapy is, right? And for me, because I specialize in trauma, for me, yes. For the patients that I see, yes. If somebody's coming in with a relationship issue, the answer is yes and no. Yes, the relationship specialist might need to primarily focus on the relationship between the individuals, right? But at the same time, there might be some wounds that are driving certain conversations, right? So, however, how deep they then need to go might depend on the particular situation. In my line of work, yes, and it's kind of like an onion, right? We start with some of the basic levels and then we peel. I find that a lot of people that come to see me specifically because of what I do, because it's easier to talk about a fictional character at first than to talk about what we're suffering with, right? It might be easier to talk about what it was like for Bruce Wayne or Batman to witness 2 of his parents being killed than it is for them to talk about what it was like for them to lose their own parents. But then we can draw these lines and we can say, well, Bruce felt this, how did you feel? What was it like for you? And if this is your origin story, if you were to put on a cape, what would your journey look like? What kind of superhero would you be like then? Right? So then the goal would become to not only access the person's trauma, but to make it their origin story and a platform from which they continue their heroic journey. And you have a follow-up question?
I do. So for instance, Bruce Wayne became Batman because of the trauma.
Right.
So that is kind of where we shine when we embrace that pain. Do you find that with
That is what I'm finding with post-traumatic growth, yes. So the question was, is it the case that for a lot of people where they become heroic, that maybe it stems from some kind of trauma? Yes. However, I want to include a little statement here. It is not necessary to have a trauma to be heroic. So it doesn't mean that you have to be Bruce Wayne and witness your parents being killed in order to become a superhero. That's not necessary. However, it is true that all of us carry some kind of a painful experience, whether it's loss, whether it's rejection, right? Whether it's something that we wanted very badly and we didn't get. But what we do with that pain is up to us. We always have choices. We always have choices in how we respond to painful or uncomfortable situation. And if we view it as, this is my dragon to slay, this is my heroic journey, and this is maybe a villain that showed up, how do I respond to this? Instead of giving up, it might give us the emphasis and the push to keep going, to continue doing what's really important.
I guess, if you look at the news cycle lately, especially adolescents, right? So not talking necessarily about personal trauma, but a lot of times, many people you would speak to are really finding fatigue, like mental fatigue with things that keep happening in the world, and it seems like it's never going to get better. necessarily trauma, but,
Political overwhelm?
political overwhelm.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And actually, I get asked this question a lot, especially in this past year. So it doesn't matter what political party you're from. There is a lot of unrest going on right now, and there is a lot of there's a lot of trauma in the world. You know, just a week ago we had this horrible shooting in Las Vegas, and every week something terrible happens, and it's excruciating sometimes to go on Facebook or to watch the news. And over time, we might, as you said, become fatigued. There's actually a term for it. It's called empathic distress. So what happens is when we realize that somebody else is struggling, we feel empathy, right? So we feel their pain. And when it becomes overwhelming, we call it empathic distress. And this is where self-compassion is key. Because when there is let's say a car accident and multiple people are injured, we need to triage, right? We need to assess where the most danger is and who can we save. And in this situation, we need to do the same. And the truth is, we might realize, yes, all of these people in the world are suffering, but there's one person we forget. We forget ourselves. We are suffering in that moment too. When we are the recipient of bad news, we are suffering too, and we need self-compassion at that moment too. So whatever that means, whether it means taking a moment to breathe, to give ourselves a little hug, to talk to somebody, hey, this really upset me, this bothered me, I don't know how to cope, to take a moment to breathe or cry or watch something, and then we can then ask ourselves, what is something I can do? Maybe I can't undo what happened in Vegas, but maybe I can talk to people that are there. Maybe I can reach out to my friends and see that if everyone is safe. Maybe I can see if there's food I can send or some way that I can help out. So we need to make sure that we are safe so that we're strong and resilient. And by safe, I mean emotionally safe. And then once we have this resource of resilience, then we can ask, what is it that I can do? Because I think so often we might feel hopeless and defeated by everything that's happening, that it feels like I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't help in this way, and nothing I do is helping, and it feels like the world is ending. However, if we're able to support ourselves and then ask, what is something I can do, that is already something that is a huge step toward support. I've spoken to a lot of people who survived terrible tragedies and disasters, and they say that what got them through were actually little signs of kindness. People who were especially affected by Sandy, right? Like I imagine a number of you guys were a few years ago, say that what really helped them is when strangers reached out to them and asked them if they needed to use the phone, right? Or if they needed to charge their phone. And it's these little acts of kindness that can go a very long way and can be more helpful than probably a lot of things that we might not otherwise think of. Thank you.
We have time for one more question. Good.
I teach teens and I have 2 teens. I come across, this is a great book. How would you say is the best way to model giving this book? Should you work in tandem with the teen? Should you just give it to them and let them enjoy it? What's the best way to kind of present giving this book to a teenager?
Thank you so much for asking that question. The question was, what would be the best way to present this book to a teenager? Would you want to maybe just let the teen read it? Would you want to, teach it alongside with them? And I think the answer, really depends on the person themselves. There's some people that are more introspective that maybe would get more by reading it and then discussing it. Some people might be unwilling to read a book if you give it to them. Right, so if you give them a book, they might be like, I don't need to read it. And as opposed to you saying, hey, I'm reading this really cool book, I'm actually learning all this, and then they might be interested. So I think a lot of it will depend on an individual. If you're working with a number of teenagers, like in a classroom environment, then I've actually spoken to a number of teachers who are using superhero therapy as a reading club in their high schools. So I'm working with a number of schools in San Diego that are now starting to incorporate it as a side curriculum into either English or theater classes. And so they'll assign, the chapters are pretty short, it's a comic book format and they're about 10 pages, so they assign 1 chapter per week, and then they have, let's say every Wednesday, for example, they meet and they discuss it. And they not only discuss what was read, but they discuss how people related to it. So for example, they'll say, oh, that girl in the book was bullied, or that guy was having a panic attack. Has anyone experienced anything like it? What was that like for you? What did you do? Where did you get help? Or what are some of the things we can learn from this? Thanks, Ron.
Is there anything else you want to say about superhero therapy?
Well, the most important thing about superhero therapy is that each and every one of us has superhero potential. And each and every one of us has probably changed numerous lives that we might not know about. I found that people are more likely to complain than they are to express gratitude. Do you find that? So what I've noticed though is how many people out there are going through life at the edge of the line, whether it's they're really struggling with depression and maybe they're considering suicide, but they don't talk about it, right? What we tend to talk about is superficial stuff. I mean, think about when somebody asks you how you're doing, what do you say? How are you? Fine. When are you ever fine? I don't know about you, I'm never fine. I'm running late, I'm exhausted, I have patients to see and reports to write and deadlines, and then I'm worried that, and then there's the human factor. There's the worry that I'm not good enough and smart enough and thin enough and all the stuff that we all worry about. And personally, I think we're never fine. So it's hard to talk about, but I find that when we're able to extend ourselves just a little bit and maybe offer some kindness, maybe slow down and ask somebody, how are you really doing? Or maybe just to say something kind, like, hey, I really appreciated what you said yesterday, or, I really think you did a great job on this report. We can go a really long way. I've had patients telling me this, and I've had colleagues telling me this, how little it takes to change someone's life. When someone is considering suicide, one rude conversation can push them over the edge, but one kind word can push them back. A friend of mine told me that he met someone in a waiting room, and the person that he met was wearing a hockey hat. And my friend and the person that he talked to liked opposite hockey teams, so they started having a bit of a rivalry discussion, kind of ragging on each other, but talking about hockey nonetheless. It turned out they both served, they're both veterans now, and they had a really nice conversation. A few weeks later, my friend saw this gentleman in the waiting room again, and the man told him, actually, I'm really glad that I saw you. I wanted to tell you that night I was going to go home and kill myself. The fact that you and I talked about hockey actually brought me back and allowed me to rethink my life. It's a small thing, but we can make a really big difference. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because I am sure that each and every one of you has, but you might not know that. There are probably multiple people out there that are alive today because of you, because of your kind actions, because of your kind words, but they might not have told you. So I wanted to let you know that each and every single one of you is a superhero. So please do not forget your capes.